This episode of Cold Turkey Cases is sponsored by Wendy's. Always fresh, never frozen. Okay, guys, welcome to our episode of Cold Turkey Cases. We will be talking about the murder of Hae Min Lee and the alleged murderer, her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed. Due to the popularity of this podcast series, Serial, we are pulling the case apart while looking into how the truth can be harder to find. The search for the truth can be changed, misinformed, due to the change of relationships in humans, this coinciding with the power of the media. Now, I brought in a specialist on this case, JJ, to come answer some questions for us today. Well, it's nice to meet you today, JJ. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you. I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
It's great. I'm so happy you were able to come on this show because I've been really wondering about this case. And
Yes.
I've been listening to the podcast Serial, and it's so interesting. So I'm going to start us off with our first question. Now, what does Serial teach us at the individual level? In other words, what can someone learn about how to live their own lives better after listening to this story?
Well, the podcast Serial teaches us that at an individual level, when searching for the truth, it can be harder than expected because people and relationships around them change and fade constantly, thus making it harder to find the correct testimony in this case. In Serial, the only solid evidence that puts Adnan Syed into jail was Jay's testimony. While human evidence can be good, it lacks the factual evidence that is needed for a fair trial. Relationships with others can change and differ for the better or for the worse. In this case, Adnan and Hae grew apart from each other and weren't the couple they once were at the beginning. Just as in Oedipus, the relationship with Jocasta changed significantly between them when Oedipus found out she was his mother. Although the circumstances differ, the pattern of the relationships are notable. In addition, the justice system used his heritage against Adnan, saying that the conflict of his religious beliefs could have possibly killed her. This is similar to how the media and the internet will, at times, only capture parts of a full story. In the article Truths, Lies, and the Internet, the philosophy of Mercier and Sperber is that narratives, ideas, and ideologies are what fill the world, not facts, basically saying the truth may be blinded and hard to uncover under the beliefs of society.
I always find that sometimes the media can share a lot of inconsistencies in what's going on. But you were starting to talk about relationships, so I want to ask, what does Serial say about relationships?
Well, when looking into relationships, especially with the murder of Hae Lee, the relation with Adnan had changed drastically. With Jay, who was his friend, he told cops the one piece of evidence was enough detail to put Adnan in jail, while some of his friends, such as Asia, tried helping him in his case and later thought he deserved to be in jail. Even Hae, who was murdered, was Adnan's ex-girlfriend. Relationships change, fade, and pass. Even with the highlight of Greek literature, relationships change fast in that book. In the beginning of the book, Oedipus and his wife Jocasta were just that, husband and wife. Although by the end of the Greek play, Oedipus finds out his birth and the sin he's within his own house by stabbing his eyes to make him blind. Darkness, dark cloud all around me, enclosing me unspeakable darkness, irresistible. You came to me on wind that seemed favorable. Oedipus is telling us how he would rather live in a world of darkness, ignorance, than be shed the truth. Now what does this have to do with the case of Hae? Well, this is prime evidence to show how the human mind is not the most trustworthy thing. In fact, it is probably the most unreliable type source of evidence. The human brain can be influenced by different factors, one of the big ones being relationships. These relationships can influence how a person acts and what a person may say. For example, Oedipus has sex with Jocasta before he knew that she was his mother. After knowing the fact, he felt like a vile being, and that his children would never be loved due to this fact. Now, most of you know that people with a certain relationship will act a certain way, so why is the main piece of evidence against Adnan a testimony? That had inconsistencies with the police's timeline anyways. To me, it makes no sense.
And it makes no sense to me as well. Well, what does Serial say about searching for the truth?
Serial shows us how the truth can be lost with time. For example, a lot of the kids involved in the case or who had known Adnan during the time of Hay's disappearance are now adults. It shows how difficult it is for ordinary people to recollect their memory, whether they're telling the truth or not. Someone may be indefinitely telling the truth, yet everyone is bound to have holes in their story because, according to Canadian neuroscience researcher Luke Maston, in his article, The Human Memory, the part of our brain that we use when we see everyday people and objects is subconsciously controlled by our sensory memory. Our sensory memory, which is recognized as iconic memory when we see things, oral memory with hearing, and haptic memory with touch, processes stimuli within a matter of 200 to 500 milliseconds, dividing what we experience into a place in our brain to be stored as short-term memory, while the rest gets forgotten. Given how much we experience in a day, it is impossible to be conscious of this process, which tells us whether 6 weeks or 6 years had gone by, it still would be difficult for someone to remember seeing a specific person at a specific time on a specific date. What does this tell us about lying? Well, this also tells us that if someone is lying, they are more likely than not to remember a certain date or event, which should tell us why an investigator needs to pay close attention to body language and tone of voice when seeking out the truth.
So, you're saying that, the police have to pay more attention to body language than actual testimonies?
Well, yes, because when taking these facts into consideration, obviously a liar isn't going to come out with the truth. It's just more probable that they do remember that specific date.
That's really interesting.
Whereas Adnan doesn't want to incarcerate himself, he still could remember what has happened, is what
Now, okay. After looking at Serial, the podcast, and looking into this investigation of Hay, what do you think the primary message about this is? Or the moral? Or even the point? What is it?
I would say that the main message of Serial is that the truth is inconsistent and harder to find because of the circumstances of life. Serial is teaching us that everything is not what it seems, and that sometimes in life, people haven't uncovered everything there is to be found. Serial arguably comes at the credibility of this specific authoritative system, so as to say they didn't work diligently enough on this case. But overall, the main focus is around why more information on this case couldn't have been discovered, proving the non-compliance of people involved from the past, lack of memory, and lack of factual evidence. It is unknown whether Adnan is solely the murderer purely because of a strong testimony.
Well, thank you for coming on our show today. It was really cool to hear about how the truth can be harder to find and everything. Now, for all of you listening out there, I hope you take this case and learn how to look deeper within the truth. That's constantly what we're always trying to find. I have a question for you, my lovely listeners. Who do you believe is actually the true murderer of Hay? Was it actually her ex-boyfriend Adnan, or could it have been someone else deep down inside? So, thanks for coming with us on Cold Turkey Cases. Talk to you later, guys. Bye!